The air in the ornate drawing room was thick, heavy with unspoken history and the faint scent of aged wood polish. It pressed down on me, a physical weight against my chest. My fingers traced the cool, smooth edge of the envelope clutched tight in my lap, the paper feeling impossibly thin, yet holding the gravity of worlds. Outside, the afternoon sun, muted by heavy velvet curtains, cast long, dusty shafts across the polished floorboards, illuminating motes dancing in the stillness. I could hear the grandfather clock in the hall ticking, each beat a tiny, relentless hammer blow against the silence. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Across from me sat two figures, statues carved from old money and harder judgment. Their faces, usually softened by the veneer of polite society, were masks of polite expectation, waiting. They waited for me to speak, for me to shatter the perfect tableau they had carefully constructed over decades. I looked at the envelope again, its plain surface a stark contrast to the gilded cage of this room. This wasn't just paper. It was the detonation code. It was the proof. It was the answer to a threat whispered in the dark, a promise of ruin I was never meant to survive. And now, holding it, I wasn't just surviving. I was striking back. The grandfather clock chimed the quarter hour, the sound echoing through the silent house. It was time. If this story hits close to home, or if you just find yourself drawn into these raw, human moments, please take a second to let me know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It truly helps me bring more of these stories to life. Our life had settled into that comfortable, predictable rhythm that people mistake for happiness. It wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but something softer, like a well-worn quilt, familiar, warm, a little faded around the edges perhaps, but comforting in its reliability. 10 years we'd built this. A home with a garden I poured my heart into, late-night talks about our day, the shared silence that felt companionable rather than empty. He was Mark. Solid, dependable Mark. Or so I thought. He had a good job, a certain easy charm that impressed people, and a family name that carried weight in certain circles. Not old aristocracy, but established wealth, generational respectability earned through shrewd business and careful public image. His parents, strict but fair, were proud of their son, proud of the life he was building, proud of the respectable woman he'd married. They were pillars of their community, philanthropists, their names synonymous with integrity. I fit into that world, quiet, supportive, managing our home, hosting the right dinner parties, presenting the right image. It wasn't the life I dreamed of as a wild teenager, but it was good. It was secure. It was what I thought I wanted: stability, belonging, a partner who saw me, who valued me. My desires were simple: a peaceful life, a happy marriage, perhaps a future with children someday, building something lasting together. I trusted him implicitly. Why wouldn't I? There were no warning signs, no late nights that didn't add up, no strange phone calls. Our lives were intertwined, mundane and beautiful in their ordinariness. We talked about retirement plans, about renovating the kitchen, about where we'd go for our anniversary trip next year. It was all laid out, a straight, well-lit path stretching into the future. The foundation felt solid, built on years of shared history, mutual respect, and, I believed, love. I felt safe. I felt loved. I felt like my life was finally, truly beginning. The house wasn't just a building. It was the physical manifestation of that safety, that future. Every book on the shelf, every picture on the wall, every plant in the garden, it all spoke of permanence, of a life being carefully curated, grown, nurtured. My world felt full, complete. The idea that any of it could be an illusion was simply unthinkable. It was like assuming the ground beneath your feet wouldn't suddenly open up. Why would it? Everything was fine. Everything was perfect. Until it wasn't. The world didn't crack with a bang, but with a sickening, silent air. It was a Tuesday late afternoon. He was still at work, and I was cleaning out a closet, one of those mundane tasks you put off forever. High on a shelf, tucked behind old photo albums and forgotten linens, I found it. A second phone. It wasn't ours. It wasn't work-related. It was sleek, new, hidden. My first thought was confusion. Why would he need two phones? Then, a cold knot began to form in my stomach. It wasn't a thought, more a primal knowing. I picked it up. It wasn't password protected. As I scrolled through the messages, the world outside the closet door seemed to fade. The air grew thin. Each text message, each photo, was a shard of glass twisting in my gut. Years. It had been years. Not a fleeting mistake, but a parallel life, meticulously hidden, consistently nurtured. Names I didn't recognize, plans I knew nothing about, declarations of love meant for someone else. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the depth of the deception. The lies weren't just about where he was or who he was with, they were about who he was fundamentally. The Mark I knew, the husband I loved, was a ghost, a performance. The man revealed in those messages was a stranger, cruel in his secrecy, selfish in his double life. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the phone. The knot in my stomach tightened, a physical pain now. It felt like being punched, hard, in the solar plexus, stealing my breath. I sank to the closet floor, surrounded by the dusty relics of the life I thought we shared. The silence of the house was suddenly deafening, mocking the chaos erupting inside me. The comfort of the familiar home felt like a betrayal itself, every object a silent witness to a lie I hadn't seen. I remember staring at a stack of our wedding photos on the shelf, the smiling faces seeming impossibly naive, innocent. How could I have been so blind? The messages blurred through tears, but the meaning was crystal clear. He was having an affair. A long-term, serious affair. With someone who wasn't just a fling, but someone he was building another future with. The pain was so acute it was physical, a searing burn across my chest. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was the complete disintegration of my reality. Everything I thought was real was a lie. The man I shared my bed with, my life with, was a stranger, a deceiver. The discovery wasn't just the end of a marriage, it felt like the end of me. The secure, loved woman vanished, replaced by someone hollow, numb, staring at the wreckage of her life, laid bare on a small screen. I stayed there for a long time, the dust motes dancing in the fading light, the silent house holding its breath around me. When I finally stood up, my legs were weak, my hands still trembling. I wasn't just finding out my husband was cheating. I was finding out my entire life was a meticulously constructed lie, and I had been living inside it. He came home later that evening, whistling, carrying groceries. The normalcy of it was obscene. He chatted about his day, about a tricky client, about what we should have for dinner. I watched him, detached, as if observing a fascinating, horrifying specimen. The man was a masterful actor. How many times had he stood right here, in our kitchen, discussing our future while planning another one with someone else? The second phone was still hidden, but its presence crackled in the air between us like static electricity. I couldn't eat. The knot in my stomach had twisted into a hard, unforgiving stone. The casual questions, the easy laughter, it all felt like nails on a chalkboard. He eventually noticed my silence, my paleness. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice carrying that familiar, assumed concern. It was a performance I had believed for years. Now I saw the strings. I saw the empty stage behind the facade. I took a deep breath. The air tasted like ash. "I found something," I said, my voice thin, reedy, not my own. His eyes flickered, just for a fraction of a second, a tiny tremor in the carefully constructed mask. But he recovered instantly. "Oh, what's that?" His tone was light, curious. The masterful deception continued. I walked to where I had hidden the second phone. My hands were shaking again. I laid it on the kitchen counter, its dark screen a mirror reflecting back the destruction. He looked at it, and for the first time, the mask slipped. Not completely, but enough. A flicker of something raw, surprise, fear, annoyance, crossed his face before being replaced by a carefully practiced indifference. "What's this?" he asked, picking it up. His voice was cooler now, wary. He scrolled for a moment, his thumb moving deliberately. He knew. He knew exactly what it was. He didn't even have to open the messages. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sallow gray. He looked up at me, and the man standing there was not the husband I had known. He was a cornered animal, eyes narrowed, defensive. The easy charm was gone, replaced by something hard and calculating. There was no confession, no apology, no plea for forgiveness. Only a chilling silence that stretched, tense and suffocating. Then he put the phone down slowly, deliberately, as if placing a weapon. He looked at me, and his eyes were cold, devoid of warmth, devoid of love. "So," he said, his voice low, cutting. "You went through my things." He made it sound like I was the one who had violated something sacred. He didn't address the content, the betrayal. He attacked my discovery of it. The audacity stole my breath. I found my voice, though it was barely a whisper. "Years, Mark? Years." He didn't flinch. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms, regaining his composure with unnerving speed. The cornered animal was gone, replaced by a predator. "It is what it is," he said, shrugging slightly. A shrug. After years of lies, years of a double life, that was his response. "What about us?" I asked, the word catching in my throat. He looked at me, and there was a flash of something I hadn't seen before. Contempt. "Us," he repeated, as if the concept was foreign, ridiculous. "There hasn't been an us for a long time." Clearly, his gaze swept over me, dismissive. "You think this changes anything? You think finding this gives you leverage?" He started to walk slowly around the kitchen island, his posture confident, predatory. "You're being naive. Things are complicated? He was having a second life. My head reeled. "Complicated?" I repeated, the word a raw sound of disbelief. "You lied to me for years. You built a lie." He stopped, facing me across the island. His voice dropped again, low, menacing. "And now you've decided to blow it all up," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of accusation. "Do you have any idea the mess you're making? The damage you're causing?" He wasn't talking about the damage to me, to us. He was talking about the damage to his carefully constructed world, his reputation. The sheer selfishness of it was staggering. "I didn't make this mess, Mark," I said, my voice gaining strength, though it still trembled. "You did," he laughed then, a short, sharp, humorless sound that echoed in the silent kitchen. "Did I?" he sneered. "Or did you just fail to keep my attention?" The cruelty was breathtaking. It felt like another punch, harder than the first. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a cold, calculated dismissal of my worth, of our entire shared history. He straightened up, his eyes fixed on mine, hard and unwavering. This was the moment the threat was born, the words that would echo in my head for months. His voice was cold, devoid of any trace of the man I thought I married. It was the voice of a businessman closing a deal, final and ruthless. "You'll regret ever crossing me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of a hammer blow. "You think you have the upper hand? You have nothing. My family's name, my connections, my lawyers. You try to make trouble, you try to take anything from me, and I will bury you. Financially, socially. You will have nothing left." "Nothing," he smiled then, a thin, humorless smile that sent a chill down my spine. "You should have just pretended you didn't find anything. Now you've started a war you can't win." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing alone in the wreckage of my life, the silent house a tomb of shattered promises. The second phone lay on the counter, a dark, inert object, the catalyst for the war he had just declared. My fear was absolute. He had the power, the money, the family name. I had a hidden phone and a broken heart. He had just promised to destroy me, and I believed him. The silence after he left was deafening, broken only by the frantic beating of my own heart. The beautiful, safe home felt like a prison now, every corner holding a memory twisted into a weapon against me. Sleep was impossible. I paced the floors, the words, "You'll regret ever crossing me," replaying on a loop in my mind. His confidence was terrifying. He wasn't just ending our marriage, he was planning my annihilation. How could someone I had shared my life with for 10 years turn so utterly, so swiftly, into an enemy? It wasn't just the betrayal that cut so deep. It was the cold, calculating malice in his eyes, the absolute lack of remorse, the immediate pivot to destruction. I was a problem to be eliminated, not a person whose heart he had broken. The initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a raw, throbbing pain and a creeping sense of panic. What was I going to do? He had warned me. He had shown me the depth of his ruthlessness. He had the resources to back up his threat. My mind raced, cycling through possibilities, each one ending in defeat. How could I fight his family's reputation, their lawyers, their money? I felt small, vulnerable, completely outmatched. Every noise in the house made me jump. The shadows seemed to deepen, hiding threats. I was adrift in a hostile sea, with no land in sight. The life I had built, the future I had envisioned, had been vaporized in an instant, replaced by a terrifying, uncertain present. The garden I loved, usually a source of peace, now seemed alien, mocking me with its continued growth while my world withered. I looked out the window at the familiar street, the familiar houses, and felt utterly disconnected. Was this really happening? Was this my life now? A battle for survival against the man I had loved? The first few days were a blur of fear and inertia. I consulted a lawyer, a kind woman with a weary expression who listened patiently as I haltingly recounted the story. She explained the process, the likely trajectory, the challenges. She didn't sugarcoat it. Divorce was messy, expensive, emotionally draining. Against someone with Mark's resources and apparent willingness to fight dirty, it would be a brutal process. Her words, though pragmatic, felt like yet another confirmation of my helplessness. He started making moves almost immediately, cutting off access to joint accounts, changing locks on properties I didn't even know we owned outright, removing artwork, valuables. It was a systematic dismantling of our shared life, not just splitting assets, but actively trying to leave me with nothing. He had meant what he said. Every action was calculated to cause maximum distress and financial hardship. He was isolating me, cutting off my lifelines. The fear intensified. This wasn't just a messy divorce, it was a targeted attack. The feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. I felt trapped, the walls closing in. The quiet house felt less like a prison and more like a battleground, every object a reminder of his presence, his control, his betrayal. He sent me cold, formal emails through lawyers, outlining demands that were laughably unfair, clearly designed to provoke, to exhaust, to intimidate. He wanted the house, the cars, the bulk of the assets. He offered a pittance, barely enough to get by, conditional on my absolute silence and immediate compliance. His message was clear: capitulate or be destroyed. My lawyer advised caution, negotiation. But every concession felt like a surrender, another step towards the nothing he promised. My pride, bruised and battered, stirred. Could I just roll over? Could I let him win so completely after everything? After the lies, the betrayal, the threat? A small, stubborn ember of defiance began to glow in the ashes of my fear. The turning point wasn't a sudden epiphany, but a slow, grinding realization. It came not from finding more evidence of the affair. I had plenty of that, tucked away, a bitter hoard of proof, but from understanding the nature of his attack. He wasn't just trying to get rid of me or minimize his financial losses in the divorce. He was trying to annihilate me. He wanted me not just divorced, but ruined, destitute, disgraced. He wanted me to regret crossing him so profoundly that the memory would haunt me forever. He wasn't fighting for assets. He was fighting to protect his image, his reputation, his carefully constructed place in the world, his family's world. And that was the key. His family, his parents, their name, their standing. That was his true vulnerability. He could lose money, assets, even the house. But the one thing he seemed to guard with almost obsessive zeal was the spotless reputation of his family name. He played the role of the successful, respectable son to perfection for them. He needed their approval, their pride. That was his currency within his own world, a currency far more valuable to him than mere money or even, it seemed, the woman he was having an affair with. The other woman was a symptom. The protection of his status was the core motivation for his ruthlessness towards me. This realization shifted something fundamental inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it coalesced, sharpening into a cold, focused anger. I wasn't just trying to survive the divorce anymore. I was fighting for my life, for my right to exist beyond his shadow, beyond his control. And I couldn't fight him on his terms, with his money, his lawyers, his connections. I had to find a different battlefield, one where his advantages were liabilities. His family name, their reputation. That was the foundation of his power, the very thing he used to threaten me. What if I could shake that foundation? What if I could turn his greatest strength into his greatest weakness? The idea took root, dark and complex. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about survival, about proving him wrong, about ensuring I didn't regret crossing him. It was about using the truth as a weapon, not just for legal victory but for something more profound, a reclaiming of my own power. My lawyer, bless her pragmatic soul, focused on the legal strategy, on documentation, on court filings. But I knew this fight wasn't just happening in the courtroom. It was a battle for narrative, for reputation, for the truth behind the polished facade. While she worked on the legal angles, I started digging deeper. Not just into the affair, but into him. His habits, his contacts, his patterns. The second phone, my initial catalyst, became a key to unlocking more. I discovered encrypted messaging apps, burner email accounts, clandestine meetings documented in obscure digital footprints. It was a labyrinth of deceit, far more extensive than I had initially imagined. This wasn't a man who had simply strayed. This was a man who had built an entire shadow life, maintained with meticulous care and a chilling level of deception. The depth of his duplicity was staggering. It wasn't just the affair, it was financial irregularities I uncovered. Dubious business dealings hinted at unveiled messages, a web of questionable associations he had carefully kept hidden from his respectable family and the public eye. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a man operating on the fringes of legality, leveraging his family name while potentially compromising it behind the scenes. This was the leverage I needed. The affair was personal, painful, but ultimately, in his world, survivable, perhaps even explainable away as a mistake, but financial misconduct, unethical business practices that could tarnish the family name, the one thing he cherished above all else. The more I dug, the more a picture emerged not just of a cheating husband, but of a man who lived a constant lie, balancing on a precipice he had created himself. The information was scattered, hidden, requiring patience and a willingness to delve into the uncomfortable underbelly of his life. It was tedious, emotionally draining work, sifting through digital debris, cross-referencing names and dates, piecing together fragments of a hidden reality. There were moments I wanted to give up, to simply sign whatever he put in front of me and walk away with nothing, just to make it stop. The constant pressure from his lawyers, the isolation, the sheer exhaustion wore me down. But then I would remember his eyes, cold and contemptuous, and his words, "You'll regret ever crossing me," and the fire in my belly would reignite. He wanted to break me. He wanted me to live in regret. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The evidence I gathered wasn't just proof of his wrongdoing, it was a shield, a weapon. It was the culmination of countless hours of painstaking effort, fueled by a grim determination not to be erased. I didn't have his money or his name, but I had the truth, painstakingly unearthed from the lies. And I had a plan. A risky plan, one that bypassed the lengthy, draining legal battles he intended to wage. It was a direct strike at the heart of his world, targeting the one thing he couldn't afford to lose, his family's respect and their pristine reputation. This wouldn't be a drawn-out war of attrition in courtrooms. It would be a swift, surgical strike designed to leverage his deepest fear. It was a gamble, but with everything on the line, it felt like the only way to truly level the playing field, to show him that crossing me had consequences he hadn't anticipated. The time for fear was over. The time for strategy had begun. The challenges mounted, relentless and suffocating. His legal team was aggressive, filing motions designed to tie me up in procedural knots, demanding endless documentation, delaying everything. They were clearly following his directive: drag it out, make it painful, bleed her dry. My own legal fees were climbing rapidly, a constant source of anxiety. I felt the financial walls closing in. He wasn't just cutting off access, he was actively making it difficult for me to pay for the fight. He used the media, subtly at first, planting rumors, spinning narratives through anonymous sources connected to his business contacts. Small mentions in society columns, veiled references in business journals, nothing I could directly refute legally, but enough to sow seeds of doubt about my character, my stability. He was carefully constructing a public image of me as unstable, vengeful, motivated solely by greed. It was insidious, a slow poisoning of my reputation in the circles we moved in. Friends became awkward, distant. Invitations stopped coming. The social world that had felt so welcoming now felt hostile, whispered judgments following me like a shadow. The isolation deepened. There were days I felt utterly buried, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of his malice and the resources he was throwing against me. My lawyer, while supportive, could only do so much within the bounds of the law. She couldn't shield me from the emotional toll, the exhaustion, the feeling that I was fighting a phantom enemy who attacked from every angle. The lowest point came after a particularly brutal court hearing, a preliminary motion where his lawyers successfully delayed a crucial financial disclosure. It wasn't a defeat on the main issues, but it felt like one. Another delay, more fees, more time spent in this agonizing limbo. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray afternoon light, feeling utterly defeated. I called my lawyer from the street, my voice thick with tears. "I don't know if I can do this," I confessed, the words torn from the deepest part of my despair. "He's winning. He's just going to wear me down until I have nothing left." She listened patiently, offering words of encouragement, reminding me that it was a marathon, not a sprint. But her words, though kind, felt hollow against the weight of my exhaustion. I went home to the silent house, which felt less like a home and more like a cage. The reality of my situation crashed down on me with full force. I was financially precarious, socially ostracized, emotionally ravaged. He had succeeded in isolating me, in making me question my own strength, my own sanity. His threat, "You'll regret ever crossing me," felt like a prophecy fulfilled. It seemed impossible to fight back against someone so determined, so resourced, so utterly lacking in any moral compass. Giving up felt like the only rational option, the only way to make the pain stop. To surrender. To let him have his victory, his nothing for me. The thought settled like a shroud, cold and heavy. What was the point of fighting if the cost was my complete destruction? If I was already ruined? But surrender wasn't an option. Not truly. Not after everything. Not after his sneering confidence, his promise of ruin. The thought of giving him that satisfaction, of allowing him to walk away having successfully destroyed me, was worse than the struggle itself. Somewhere in the depths of my despair, a tiny spark of defiance flickered back to life. I was bruised, battered, but not broken. Not yet. The crucial shift in my thinking came not from some dramatic event, but from a quiet, internal realization. I was playing his game, by his rules, on his chosen battlefield, the legal system, the social circles he controlled. I was letting him dictate the terms of the fight. But I had something he didn't know I had, something he couldn't control. The truth about who he really was, not just as a husband but as a businessman, as a man whose actions could tarnish the very name that was his shield. I had spent weeks focused on the legal battle, on responding to his attacks, on defending myself. But what if the best defense was an unexpected offense? An attack on his weakest point, a point he hadn't even considered vulnerable because he believed it was impenetrable? His parents, their name, their pride, their image. He had used that as his ultimate weapon, the leverage he held over me. He believed I would never dare bring shame to his family, that I would simply disappear to protect them from scandal. He underestimated me. He underestimated the depth of my resolve, forged in the fires of his betrayal and his malice. My focus shifted. The legal battle became a secondary concern. The primary objective was no longer just securing a fair divorce settlement. It was about neutralizing his threat, about ensuring he regretted his actions, not mine. I needed to use the information I had gathered, the evidence of the affair, yes, but more importantly, the evidence of his shady business dealings, the financial irregularities, the things that could truly damage his standing with his family and within their world. This wasn't just about exposing the cheating, it was about exposing the man behind the mask, the man who was willing to burn everything down, including me, to protect his facade. The plan was audacious, risky, and completely outside the conventional legal framework. It involved bypassing the lawyers, the courtrooms, the endless motions, and going straight to the source of his power and vulnerability, his parents. It was a move he would never anticipate. He was so focused on fighting me legally, on wearing me down financially and emotionally, that he would never expect me to target the very foundation he stood on. I knew it could backfire horribly. His parents might not believe me. They might side with him, dismissing my claims as the bitter accusations of a vengeful ex-wife. They might even turn their considerable resources against me, making my life even more miserable. But the alternative was slow, certain defeat. I was already losing the battle on his terms. I had to create new terms. I had to bring the fight to his doorstep in a way he couldn't control or predict. The evidence I had was crucial. The affair proof was damning on a personal level, but the financial evidence, the hints of illegal or unethical activities, that was the bomb. That was what could truly shake his parents' world, built on integrity and respectability. They were proud people, fiercely protective of their name. The idea that their son might be jeopardizing that name through reckless behavior, through actions that could lead to scandal or even legal trouble, would hit them far harder than the news of an affair. I began to refine my strategy. It wasn't enough to just show them the evidence. I had to present it in a way that was undeniable, credible, and impactful. I organized the documents, the messages, the financial trails. I cross-referenced everything, building a clear, irrefutable case not just of infidelity, but of calculated deception and potential wrongdoing that went far beyond a personal betrayal. This wasn't just about my broken heart. It was about their son's character, his judgment, his potential to damage the family legacy they had worked so hard to protect. The plan crystallized: request a meeting with his parents, ostensibly to discuss the divorce and find an amicable path forward. A lie, of course, but a necessary one to get them to agree. And then, in the quiet solemnity of their home, lay bare the full, unvarnished truth. It was a calculated risk, a gamble that their pride, their sense of honor, and their fear of public scandal would outweigh their loyalty to their son. It was the ultimate test of his threat, the ultimate act of crossing him in a way he hadn't foreseen. I wouldn't regret it. Not if it meant reclaiming my life from the ruins he had created. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. Fuel for the final push, for the moment of confrontation that would decide everything. I was walking into the lion's den, but this time, I wasn't empty-handed. I was armed with the truth, and the truth, I hoped, would be my shield and my sword. The day of the meeting dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I dressed simply, conservatively, wanting to project an image of calm composure, not hysterical accusation. The envelope, thicker now with the organized evidence, felt heavy in my hands. My lawyer knew I was meeting them, but not the full extent of my plan. She would have advised against it. It was too unpredictable, too emotionally charged, too far outside the standard legal process. But this wasn't a standard situation. This was personal. This was necessary. I drove to their house, the grand, imposing residence that symbolized everything Mark coveted and relied upon. It wasn't just a home. It was a monument to their success, their respectability. Walking up the long drive felt like walking a plank. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I rang the doorbell, the chime echoing in the silence. The maid opened the door, her expression politely neutral, showing me into the same drawing room where I now sat, the silence stretching, the grandfather clock ticking, the weight of the moment pressing down. And then they entered. Mark's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thorne. His father, tall and austere, his mother, impeccably dressed, her face a carefully schooled mask of concern. They greeted me with formal politeness, their eyes searching, wary. We made small talk for a few minutes, circling the edges of the topic like cautious animals. Then his father cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Anna," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "We understand things are difficult. We hoped, perhaps we could find a way to resolve this amicably. For everyone's sake. For the family's sake, for the family's sake." There it was, the heart of his vulnerability. His mother added softly, "We're very concerned about Mark. He's been under a lot of stress? He'd been meticulously planning my destruction." I held the envelope tighter. It was time. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my efforts to control it. "I appreciate your concern, but I don't think you understand the full extent of the situation. Or the kind of man your son has become." I saw a flicker of annoyance cross his father's face, a tightening around his mother's mouth. They expected me to be emotional, perhaps to plead or to negotiate. They didn't expect a direct challenge. "Anna," his father said, his tone firm, "Mark has explained the situation. These things happen in marriages. We hoped you could both be reasonable." Reasonable? His definition of reasonable was leaving me with nothing and threatening to destroy me. My resolve hardened. "With all due respect, sir," I said, my voice gaining strength, "Mark has not been entirely truthful with you." I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. It lay there, stark and silent, containing the detonator. "This," I said, my gaze meeting theirs directly, "is not just about infidelity. This is about deceit, about manipulation, about a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond a personal betrayal." I opened the envelope and began to carefully lay out the contents. The printed messages from the second phone, damning in their clarity. The carefully documented timeline of the affair. The evidence of his attempts to drain accounts and hide assets. And then, the bombshells. The cryptic emails hinting at questionable business deals, the veiled references to transactions that skirted the law, the evidence I had found linking him to individuals known for less than savory practices. I spoke calmly, factually, presenting the information without emotion, letting the evidence speak for itself. I showed them the paper trails, the digital breadcrumbs. I showed them the man he was when he thought no one was watching. As I laid out each piece, their carefully constructed masks began to crack. His mother gasped softly, her hand going to her mouth. His father's face grew progressively paler, his eyes fixed on the documents, his jaw clenched tight. The polite expectation was replaced by dawning horror, then disbelief, and finally, a cold, terrible anger. This wasn't just their son's marital infidelity. This was potential scandal, legal trouble, a threat to everything they had built and protected. Their name, their legacy. I finished speaking, the silence in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. The grandfather clock ticked on, measuring the seconds of their world collapsing. They looked at the evidence, then at me, their eyes reflecting the shock and betrayal they were feeling. This cannot be true," his father said, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "Mark would never. Mark said I would regret ever crossing him." I interrupted, my voice steady now. "He planned to leave me with nothing, to ruin me financially and socially, to ensure my silence." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "He used your name, your reputation, as a shield and as a weapon. He believed I would never dare bring this to your attention, that I would protect you from the truth about him." I watched their faces as they processed this, not just the infidelity, but the calculated malice, the use of their own standing against me, and the potential for public disgrace. Their son had not only betrayed his wife, he had potentially jeopardized the very foundation of their family's honor. Just as the silence became unbearable, the door opened, and Mark walked in, looking smug, confident. He hadn't expected me to be here. He hadn't expected his parents to be here with me. His smile faltered when he saw the scene. The documents spread on the table, his parents' faces grim, my calm presence in the center of it. He had walked into the trap. He looked at me, then at his parents, a confused frown on his face. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of unease. His father didn't answer him. He simply picked up one of the documents, a printout of a particularly damning email exchange I had found, and held it out to Mark, his hand trembling slightly, but his gaze hard as steel. "Explain this, Mark," he said, his voice low, dangerous. Mark took the paper, his eyes scanning the contents. As he read, his face went white. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with shock, with a sudden, terrifying realization. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't anticipated that I would go to his parents. He hadn't anticipated that I would uncover this kind of information. He was blindsided. Completely and utterly blindsided. He stammered, searching for words, for an explanation, his usual smooth composure shattered. It's not what it looks like," he mumbled, his gaze darting between me and his parents. His father slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. "Don't lie to me, Mark," he roared, the veneer of polite society completely gone. "We built this name on honesty, on integrity. And you would jeopardize it all for this?" He gestured to the documents, to me, encompassing the entire disastrous situation. His mother, silent until now, spoke, her voice cold, devoid of all warmth. "We trusted you, Mark. We gave you everything. And you betrayed us. You used our name while you were doing this." She looked at me, then back at him, her eyes filled with a deep, painful disappointment. "The things in these papers, the potential scandal. This is unacceptable, Mark. Unforgivable." Mark stood frozen, cornered again, but this time with no escape. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by raw panic. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He realized he had lost. Not just the divorce battle he thought he was winning, but something far more valuable to him. His parents' respect. Their support. The foundation of his world. His father stood up, his posture rigid with anger and disappointment. "Get out," he said, his voice quiet but final. "Get out of my house. And don't ever use our name again." Mark stared at him, stunned. "Father, no, please. You are no longer welcome here," his mother stated, her voice equally decisive. "Until you fix this. If you even can. We don't want to see you. You have brought shame upon this family." The disownment wasn't a dramatic pronouncement. It was a cold, brutal cutting off, delivered with the quiet authority of people who meant every word. Mark stood there, paralyzed, watching his world crumble around him, brought down not by a courtroom, but by the very people he had tried so hard to impress and protect from the truth. He had threatened to leave me with nothing. In the end, it was he who stood there, facing the prospect of having nothing left that truly mattered to him. His family, his name, his standing, gone because he underestimated the woman he tried to destroy. The plot twist wasn't just karma. It was a strategic countermove, using his own perceived strength as the leverage point, orchestrated by the person he thought had nothing. He left, stumbled out of the house, stunned and defeated. I stayed a little longer, sitting in the silence with his parents. The tension had eased, replaced by a heavy sadness. They didn't apologize for his actions, but their silence, their defeated postures, spoke volumes. They asked me about the legal situation, their tone different now, less wary, more concerned. Not for Mark, but for the fallout, for the potential damage to their name. Their pride, their legacy, that was their primary concern, and my evidence had shown them their son was a direct threat to it. They offered to help, not with the divorce settlement specifically, but with managing the fallout, ensuring discretion, protecting their reputation. It was a cold comfort, this validation, this turning of the tide. My victory wasn't a joyous triumph. It was a quiet, weary vindication. I had survived. I had fought back. I had won, in a way he could never have predicted. But the cost had been immense. The betrayal had left scars that would never fully heal. The man I had loved was gone, replaced by a bitter enemy. And though he had lost his family's support, his carefully built world collapsing around him, my own world was still shattered. Walking out of that house, back into the sunlight that now felt less harsh, I carried the weight of what had happened. Mark's parents kept their word. Their lawyers reached out to mine, no longer aggressive and demanding, but conciliatory. A fair settlement was reached quickly, without the protracted battle he had planned. They wanted the situation resolved quietly, with minimal fuss. Their name was their priority. Mark, stripped of his family's support and facing the consequences of his shady dealings being potentially exposed, was forced to concede. He got his nothing, not in the sense of financial destitution perhaps, but in the loss of the one thing he truly valued: his connection to his family, his place in their esteemed world. He had threatened to bury me, to make me regret crossing him. But in the end, his own actions, exposed by the woman he underestimated, buried him. The regret, I suspect, was all his. Life after that day was a slow, arduous process of rebuilding. The house felt different. Empty, haunted by the ghost of the man I thought lived there. I eventually sold it, needing a clean break, a fresh start. The money from the settlement gave me a cushion, a chance to redefine myself, free from the shadow of his name and his betrayal. I carried the lessons learned, etched into my soul. The importance of seeing people clearly, of trusting your instincts, of fighting for yourself when everything seems lost. The world wasn't as safe or as predictable as I had believed, but I was stronger, more resilient than I ever knew. I had faced the storm and survived, not unscathed, but unbroken. The victory wasn't sweet, but it was satisfying in a cold, hard way. I hadn't just escaped the wreckage, I had cleared it myself. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced a moment where you had to fight for yourself against overwhelming odds, I'd love to hear your version, your thoughts. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing truly helps bring more of these stories to life.